Hello, I'm Luca Coasters, and today I'm continuing the series in which I review my top 20 coasters, and this review is on my 11th favourite coaster, Untamed at Walibi Holland. Untamed is an RMC iBox conversion of the original Robin Hood, a Vekoma wooden coaster which operated from 2000 to 2018, giving its final rides on October 28th of that year. Robin Hood was generally disliked by enthusiasts and the general public alike, so when the management at Walibi Holland rode some of the RMCs in the US, they knew they had to get one for the park. When Robin Hood closed, the name Untamed was announced, but nobody knew anything about the layout yet, except that it would feature an element that was unique worldwide. Walibi also started their Building Untamed series on their YouTube channel, in which we could watch Untamed go up, and the elements and statistics would be announced one by one in every video. We got to see everything from the demolition of Robin Hood to the opening day on July 1st, 2019. The coaster made its first test runs on June 3rd, and the whole community went crazy over it, as it ran so fast for a first test and everyone thought it'd speed up loads more as Hakuge did earlier that year. Unfortunately, during the 2019 season, the coaster didn't speed up too much from the first few test runs. Statistically, Untamed isn't too impressive, just being average for an RMC. It has a height of 119.8 feet, a top speed of 57.2 miles per hour, and a track length of 3,559.7 feet. But what is impressive is the number of inversions, which is a record 5, which is the most of any RMC. This is surprising, seeing as the ride is fairly short for the number of inversions it has. Untamed has a special place in my heart, as it was my 300th coaster, and I rode it with a few of my closest friends in the community, which was great. However, the conditions I rode Untamed in were not the best. It was a cold October day with short opening hours of only 10 to 5, so the coaster was definitely not running in its prime form, but I still loved it anyways. Over the recent years, Walibi Holland has been working on the theming and scenery around their park, and nowhere is that more prevalent than in Untamed's new area called Wilderness. There are a few great theming elements such as a huge mechanical spider, and the whole area just came together really well. The huge sign in front of the coaster looks great, and the queue line in station area is so much nicer compared to the other rides in the park. The queue line has an out and back layout, allowing you to get many great views of the coaster, and while it isn't the most detailed, it is well landscaped and it moves pretty fast. The station is also amazing. There was some great music playing and the whole overgrown look of it worked really well. When I went there was assigned seating, but every time I requested a row it was granted, which was nice of the staff. There is also a single rider line to help fill up the trains, which is really good if you want to wait less for the ride. The overall look of the train is certainly unique for an RMC. It looks like a moth but has a shiny wrap, which can be annoying for taking photos because of the reflection it causes. It's not RMC's best train, and I could see why some people say it's ugly, but for me it didn't stand out too much despite it being so ornate. Untamed uses a second generation RMC trains, which are very different to the first generation trains. To start off, the lap bars are bulkier and heavier, so it's easier to get stapled, and the shin guards are also larger as well, which can make it slightly more uncomfortable. For me, these trains are so much worse than the first gen trains, as the restraints are so large, but they're still decent. I can see why some people might not like them though. On all of my rides, I was able to get just enough room so that I wasn't stapled, but it wasn't an absurd amount of room like I've got on some RMC first gen trains. But it honestly isn't too much of a problem, and thankfully on Untamed the ride-ups didn't staple. When the train dispatches, a drum beat plays, which helps create a great atmosphere in the station and it builds up anticipation for the ride. The train then makes a shallow descent before banking to the right but turning to the left in a 180-degree outward bank turn. This element feels slightly awkward as there aren't really any forces except for a kind of lateral hang time, which pushes you to the right slightly. This element is definitely better to look at than to ride, but it doesn't negatively affect the ride at all, and I don't usually take pre-lift sections into account when judging rides anyways. The train then exits the turn and rises up into the lifter before jolting for a second while the chain dog falls back into the anti-rollbacks. Once at the top, the train goes down the 80-degree drop, which is honestly nothing too special. When plummeting down the 116.1 foot drop, riders get a solid dose of ejector airtime. However, the crest of the lifter is more drawn out than on other RMCs, making the airtime weaker and less aggressive. It's just decent ejector, whereas the airtime on a drop on a similar sized RMC, Twisted Colossus, has strong ejector in the back. I'd compare the drop on Untamed most to the drop on Steel Vengeance. In terms of airtime strength, they feel exactly the same, but the airtime on the drop on Steel Vengeance is naturally way more sustained. In the back, you're thrown out of your seat and pressed against your restraint. However, in the front, like on most coasters, the drop just has some mild floater going down it. The following valley has little force, but then the train rises up into a micro bunny. This hill is so small and so drawn out, so the airtime moment isn't the strongest and is very brief. It delivered strong floater on all rows, which was decent, but it wasn't sustained enough to really enjoy. I believe that floater is best enjoyed when sustained, and on Untamed the moment is over so fast that it doesn't really add any quality to the ride as a whole. You can still notice yourself being lifted out of your seat slightly, and it is nice how the transition into the airtime is so quick, but the hill isn't pronounced enough to give the ejector which I think it needed. Upon exiting the speed hill, the train enters the most unique element on this coaster, the world's first 270-degree double inverting corner stall. Essentially, it's a steep uphill 270-degree 0G roll, which leads into a small outward bank turn at 90 degrees, which then leads into a downhill 270-degree 0G roll, and I love this inversion so much. During the first inversion, you get some amazingly sustained floater airtime, That's right, you're just floating out of your seat while rotating upside down, which somehow feels so natural. When the train is banked at 90 degrees and going through the outward banked airtime moment, you're still experiencing this amazing floater, which while not being too strong, is strong enough to keep you floating out of your seat. As the train navigates the outward banked section, the airtime strength builds up slowly to the point that when you're just about to enter the second inversion, you experience borderline ejector. The airtime's only just ejector, and by no means aggressive, but it gives the moment a slight extra kick which pushes you against your restraint. The train then twists down the downhill 0G roll, which sustains this airtime, meaning that you're experiencing airtime for the whole duration of this element, giving a total of 4 seconds in which you're floating out of your seat. After exiting that amazing inversion, you fall back into your seat and then the train rises into a double up. The first hill gives some violent ejector in the front, throwing you up and pinning you against your restraint. While it isn't quite as strong as anything on Twisted Cyclone, it is still really strong, and the sudden transition into the airtime makes it feel even more intense. But unfortunately, as you only experience one half of the hill, the airtime isn't the most sustained, with the moment lasting well under a second. In the back you get some weak ejector which also isn't very sustained, making this moment fairly forgettable in the back. The train then rises up even higher, and at the apex the train suddenly banks to the left. In the front this gives an extremely violent moment of both strong laterals and some fairly strong ejector. You're violently whipped to the right while receiving a dose of airtime similar to the previous moment in terms of both strength and how sustained it is, as just after you experience a strong jolt of forces you fall back into your seat. The back, however, is a different story. The airtime is weaker, but way more sustained. You receive some solid ejector while also getting soft laterals while descending, and the ejector lasts for just over a second, making the element much more graceful in the back. After falling back into your seat, the train navigates a low to the ground turn which has nothing special, before rising up into a large airtime hill. On this hill you get some great sustained ejector, very similar in strength to the second hill on the double up after the MCBR on Steel Vengeance. You're pushed out of your seat for almost 2 seconds, and while the element isn't the most aggressive, it's just plain fun. In the front the airtime is slightly less sustained than in the back, but the strength is fairly similar throughout the whole train. And while the airtime isn't insanely strong, the fact that it's so sustained and its decent strength make it so much fun. The train then banks to the right slightly in the next valley, before banking to the left and rising up into a large outward bank turn. In the transition into this element, you receive some decent laterals which push you to the right, and during the actual element you get a good amount of fairly strong ejector. The airtime is slightly stronger than the previous element, while also lasting for slightly longer, making the element more thrilling. The combination of laterals and the sustained airtime is great, but I definitely feel like this element and the previous element could have definitely had stronger airtime. The combination of laterals and the sustained airtime is great. The exit to the outward bank turn doesn't have any noticeable laterals, but before you know it you're entering the step up underflip, which is just a 0G roll which leads into a turn. This inversion is nothing special, it feels very similar to most RMC 0G rolls, so it has slight laterals throughout and not any good hang time, but it also doesn't really have any good floater as well, making the element just feel slightly pointless to me, and then the turn exiting this inversion is also nothing special. During this left hand turn the train rises up and banks to the right to 90 degrees, giving barely noticeable laterals which slightly push you to the left. This element underdelivered so much, it wasn't whippy at all, and as a matter of fact, the track turns slightly during this element, meaning it doesn't even deliver airtime, making it one of the most forgettable elements on this coaster, but at least it looks nice from off-ride. The train then rises up into the double up, double down element. The first hill has some strong and aggressive ejector airtime in the front, but it isn't too sustained, and in the back it just has a weak ejector. The train then rises over the top of this element in another hill which has some strong ejector in all rows, especially in the back. This is the most sustained airtime moment in this element, as you're pinned against your restraint for just under a second. The train then descends again in a great moment of ejector which flings you out of your seat aggressively. The airtime isn't as sustained as the moment just prior, but as the entrance into the hill is virtually non-existent, the airtime moment comes much more suddenly, making the airtime more aggressive. The airtime strength is slightly weaker than the bunny hills on Twisted Cyclone, but it is still really strong and really throws you around. Once you fall back into your seat, the train descends into the fourth inversion, a 140 degree stall, which is barely even an inversion, and I know many people don't even consider it an inversion. Like the previous inversion, this one is also mediocre. It lacks hang time or whip, and it just has some awkward laterals while exiting the element, which are honestly slightly uncomfortable. The section following this inversion is perhaps the most forceful on this coaster, which is where I believe it reaches its maximum G-force of 3.75 Gs. This is also where the restraint can come down slightly, but if you apply any resistance against the restraint you can stop it from coming down further. The train then whips into a decent overbank which has good laterals which push you to the left while the train flies through this element. This leads into 2 consecutive airtime hills which feel very similar to the 2 airtime hills following the third inversion on Steel Vengeance. You get some good ejector, which is somewhat sustained to a bunny hill. You're thrown out of your seat 2 times in a row, however the airtime isn't too aggressive, but the moments are still really fun and it's still good ejector, just not near RMC's strongest. But I love the succession of these 2 ejector moments. It isn't the most violent and it could have definitely been stronger though. The train then enters a twisted hill which has no airtime at all, and it's so disappointing after the 2 previous great airtime moments. On this twisted hill, the train rocks from side to side, giving mild laterals, but it isn't aggressive at all. I feel like if it was shaped slightly better, this hill could have been so much better. It's just so underwhelming after 2 consecutive moments of being launched out of your seat, you then just go through such a mild element which slightly harms the pace of this final section. During the Twisted Hill, the train also enters the structure under the corner stall, which gives a good head chopper, but it doesn't diminish from the disappointment of this element. Once in the structure, the train flies through a small bunny hill which has insanely strong ejector which comes out of nowhere. In every single row you're violently catapulted out of your seat, and while the element isn't sustained at all, the sheer strength of it makes up for that. This moment is even slightly stronger than the bunny hills on Twisted Cyclone, and one of RMC's strongest airtime moments. I love how aggressive it is and how unexpected it is, seeing as it is much stronger than any other airtime moment on this coaster. The train then whips into a right hand turner which has decent laterals, and that leads into a slow uphill barrel roll. This inversion has great hang time, but I wasn't the biggest fan. I personally don't like these really slow rolls, as when entering and exiting the roll, you get some really uncomfortable laterals which aren't aggressive and just feel awkward. And the pure hang time doesn't even last for that long. I'd much rather this be a whoopee roll, or at least it not being so slow, as it slightly distracts from the ending of the coaster for me, just because of the discomfort it causes. But if you like this type of slow roll, then you're bound to love this inversion. After exiting the roll, the train dips down slightly, giving a good moment of ejector in all rows, which flings you out of your seat for one final time. This moment is fairly aggressive and the airtime is really snappy, but the airtime itself is over so fast. The train then rises up into the final brake run, giving a decent moment of ejector towards the front, but absolutely nothing in the back. So overall, this coaster is amazing. It's by no means RMC's best, but the sheer quantity of elements makes this coaster so fun. It has 14 airtime moments, which is great, and most of those deliver at least decent ejector, and some of it is actually really high quality airtime, but unfortunately there are just a couple of airtime moments which don't live up to the others. The inversions on this coaster are also a mixed bag. While I adore the corner stall, the rest are just average or below and feel unnecessary, but Walibi Holland must have really wanted that inversion record. This ride isn't quite as insane as some of RMC's other creations, but it's pure fun and easy to marathon. However, it would have been nice if the airtime could have just been slightly stronger, as I know RMC can definitely make stronger airtime. To best summarise this ride, I would say it's like the second half of Steel Vengeance, just with a load more inversions and slightly less airtime, but this coaster lacks some of the highlights of Steel Vengeance, such as a huge first hills or the wave turn. Nonetheless, Untamed still has some good elements. There are no huge issues with this ride as well, which is why it ranks above the RMC's lower on this list, which will have one glaring issue, which is usually the pacing or the duration. Untamed just does so well at everything, but not outstanding at anything. But seeing as it's RMC, just being average at everything automatically makes it amazing, and it is easily one of my favourites. So I'd give Untamed a good score of 95 out of 100. It just doesn't quite deliver as much as some of the other RMCs do, but the complete layout just works so well. However, my problems with Untamed might have actually been remedied, as I've heard this year Untamed is running much faster than in 2019, so I hope to ride it soon and see if this ride will move up in my rankings. So, what are your thoughts on this amazing RMC? Comment that down below and like and subscribe for more rollercoaster based content.